Marcus Chen, jovem chefe de 28 anos que herdou uma fortuna de seus pais falecidos, administra discretamente um dos restaurantes mais exclusivos de Manhattan. Apesar de sua riqueza, ele encontra paz apenas na cozinha, cantarolando melodias clássicas enquanto cozinha. Sua vida muda quando Isabela Rodrigues, uma renomada soprano de ópera em crise de carreira, descobre acidentalmente seu talento vocal extraordinário durante uma refeição no restaurante. Determinada a convencê-lo a fazer um teste para a Metropolitan Opera, Isabela enfrenta a resistência de Marcus, que teme expor sua vulnerabilidade e abandonar o único lugar onde se sente verdadeiramente ele mesmo. The pre-dawn darkness of Manhattan, pressed against the windows of Lumiere, the exclusive restaurant nestled between Fifth Avenue's towering monuments to wealth and ambition. Inside, the kitchen hummed with quiet efficiency, a stark contrast to the city's restless energy just beyond its walls. Steam rose from gleaming pots like morning mist, carrying the scent of truffle oil and fresh herbs through the pristine space. Marcus Chen moved through his domain with the precision of a conductor, leading an invisible orchestra. At 28, he possessed the kind of understated elegance that money couldn't buy. It had to be earned through years of disciplined craft. His black chef's coat remained spotless, despite the complexity of his preparations, each movement deliberate and graceful. Nessun dorma, nessun dorma. The Italian words flowed from his lips in a rich baritone that seemed to resonate with the very walls of the kitchen. He didn't sing loudly. Marcus never did anything loudly, but the melody wrapped around each syllable with an intimacy that would have made Pavarotti weep. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he stood, heir to the Chen technology fortune, worth more than most small countries' GDP, finding solace in the same kitchen where his grandmother had taught him to fold dumplings as a child. The reporters who occasionally tried to penetrate his privacy painted him as the reclusive millionaire, the mysterious figure who'd turned his back on Silicon Valley to play chef. They had no idea that cooking wasn't his rebellion, it was his sanctuary. "Chef, the matsutake mushrooms arrived from Oregon," whispered James, his sous chef, careful not to interrupt the melody that had become as much a part of the morning routine as sharpening knives. Marcus nodded, his hands never pausing in their methodical preparation of the evening's amuse-bouche. "Tu pure, o principessa, nella tua fredda stanza?" the aria continued, each note perfectly pitched despite his conversational tone with James. His fingers worked the delicate pastry, while his voice painted pictures of princesses and frozen chambers, of love and sacrifice. The kitchen staff had long ago stopped marveling at their employer's dual talents. Maria, the elderly prep cook who'd worked for Marcus's family since before his birth, smiled knowingly as she arranged microgreens. She remembered the boy who used to stand on milk crates to reach the counter, singing Disney songs while his grandmother guided his small hands through knife techniques. 43 reservations tonight, announced Sarah, the front-of-house manager, appearing in the kitchen doorway with her usual clipboard and concerned expression, including that food critic from the Times. "Vincerot! Vincerot!" Marcus concluded the aria with a flourish, lifting a perfectly golden soufflé from the oven, as if the dramatic timing had been rehearsed for years. "The critic will have table 7. Prepare the wine pairing with the 2015 Burgundy." Sarah nodded, though her eyes lingered on Marcus with the same expression she'd worn for 3 years, part admiration, part concern. She'd never heard him sing outside the kitchen. Sometimes she wondered if he even realized he was doing it. The morning light began filtering through the restaurant's front windows, casting geometric shadows across the empty dining room. In 6 hours, Manhattan's elite would fill these tables, discussing million-dollar deals over Marcus's carefully crafted creations. They would praise the food, speculate about the mysterious chef, and leave generous tips that Marcus donated anonymously to the culinary school scholarship fund his grandmother had established. But now, in these precious hours before the performance began, the kitchen belonged entirely to Marcus and his music. "O sole mio," he switched to something lighter, more playful, as he began preparing the day's fresh pasta. His hands moved in rhythm with the melody, kneading the golden dough with a tenderness that spoke of both expertise and genuine affection. This was meditation for him, prayer and therapy rolled into flour and eggs. The truth was, Marcus had never intended to become a chef, much less a successful restaurateur. After his parents' death in a private plane crash 4 years ago, he'd inherited everything: the tech company, the real estate empire, the investment portfolios that generated more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. He'd tried to take over the family business, sitting through board meetings and merger discussions, but the corporate world felt like wearing clothes that didn't fit. The kitchen, however, had always fit perfectly. "Chef, there's a woman at the front door," James interrupted gently. "Says she has a reservation for lunch?" Marcus glanced at the clock, 11:30 a.m. They didn't open until noon, but exceptions were occasionally made for special circumstances. "Name? Rodriguez. Isabella Rodriguez." The name meant nothing to Marcus, but something in James's tone suggested it should. He shrugged, continuing his pasta preparation. "Seat her at table 12. I'll have the lunch menu ready in 20 minutes. What Marcus didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Isabella Rodriguez had been sitting in her car outside Lumiere for the past hour, gathering courage for a meeting that would change everything. The renowned soprano, whose career had been derailed by a vocal injury 6 months ago, had come not for the food, but for something she'd heard whispered about in Manhattan's cultural circles. They said the chef at Lumiere sang while he cooked. They said his voice could make angels weep. Isabella needed to hear it for herself. Isabella Rodriguez adjusted her silk scarf for the 3rd time, her fingers trembling slightly as she sat at table 12. The lunch crowd at Lumiere was sparse, only 5 other tables occupied by Manhattan's usual suspects: art dealers speaking in hushed tones, a tech executive scrolling through his phone between bites, and an elderly couple celebrating what appeared to be their anniversary with champagne that cost more than most people's rent. The restaurant's interior reflected the same understated elegance as its mysterious owner. Cream-colored walls adorned with subtle abstract paintings, tables dressed in crisp white linens, and lighting that seemed to caress rather than illuminate. Everything whispered wealth, but wealth with taste, a distinction Isabella had learned to appreciate during her years performing at the world's most prestigious opera houses. From the kitchen came the faint sound of activity, the rhythmic chopping of knives, the gentle sizzle of something in a pan, and underneath it all, a voice that made her breath catch in her throat. "La donna è mobile, qual piuma al vento." The melody drifted through the dining room like smoke, barely audible but unmistakably beautiful. Isabella's trained ear immediately recognized the aria from Rigoletto, but more importantly, she recognized the quality of the voice singing it. "Exceptional, isn't it?" Isabella turned to find Sarah, the front-of-house manager, standing beside her table with a knowing smile. "I'm sorry. The voice, you're a musician, aren't you? I can always tell. You get this look when you hear him sing." Sarah's voice carried the warmth of someone who'd witnessed this reaction countless times before. Isabella nodded slowly. I was an opera singer. Isabella Rodriguez." Sarah's eyes widened with genuine recognition. "The Isabella Rodriguez? From La Scala? My God, I saw you perform Tosca 3 years ago at Lincoln Center. You were magnificent." The past tense hung between them like a suspended note. Isabella forced a smile. "Thank you, that's very kind. Muta d'accento e di pensiero." The voice from the kitchen continued, each note perfectly placed, the Italian pronunciation flawless despite what Isabella suspected was an American accent. Whoever was singing understood not just the melody, but the emotion behind it. The Duke's cynical philosophy about women's fickleness delivered with just enough irony to suggest the singer knew better. "He doesn't know, does he?" Isabella asked quietly. "How good he is." Sarah shook her head. "Marcus thinks he's just humming while he works. He has no idea that half our regular customers come as much for the ambiance he creates as for the food." She paused, studying Isabella's face. "You didn't come here for lunch, did you?" Before Isabella could answer, a young man in chef's whites emerged from the kitchen, carrying a plate that looked more like a piece of art than food. The sous chef, Isabella assumed, until Sarah stood a little straighter and smoothed her skirt. "Miss Rodriguez, this is Marcus Chen, our chef and owner." Isabella felt her heart skip. This was the voice she'd been hearing. Marcus appeared younger than she'd expected, with intelligent dark eyes and hands that moved with the same precision she'd noticed in master violinists. There was something almost ethereal about his presence, a quality she'd only encountered in truly gifted artists who weren't yet aware of their own power. "Welcome to Lumiere," Marcus said, placing the plate before her with ceremony that felt genuine rather than performative. "Pan-seared halibut with butternut squash puree and microgreens from our rooftop garden." His speaking voice carried the same rich undertones she'd heard in his singing, though he seemed completely unaware of it. Isabella found herself studying his face, looking for signs of the performer's awareness that every great singer possessed. She found none. "It's beautiful," she managed, though she was looking at him rather than the plate. "Sempre un amabile leggiadro viso." The melody started again, almost unconsciously, as Marcus adjusted the placement of a garnish with tweezers. He seemed to realize he was humming and stopped abruptly, a faint color rising in his cheeks. "I apologize," he said. "I have a habit of... The kitchen gets quiet and I... Please don't apologize." Isabella's voice carried more intensity than she'd intended. "Do you have formal training?" Marcus looked genuinely confused. "In cooking? Yes, I studied at the Institute of Culinary Education, and I spent 2 years in Lyon." "No," Isabella interrupted gently. "In singing." The question seemed to catch him completely off guard. He glanced at Sarah, who suddenly found something fascinating about her clipboard, then back at Isabella. "Singing? No. I mean, I took piano lessons as a child like most kids, but singing?" He shook his head. It helps me concentrate." "Why do you ask?" Isabella felt a familiar surge of excitement, the same feeling she'd experienced years ago when she'd discovered a recording of Maria Callas that had changed her understanding of what the human voice could achieve. This was it. This was the moment that could change everything, for both of them. "Mr. Chen, Marcus, I'm not just a customer, I'm Isabella Rodriguez. I was a principal soprano at La Scala, the Metropolitan Opera, Covent Garden." She watched his eyes widen slightly. "I came here because I heard rumors about a chef who sang while he cooked. I thought it might be interesting." "Interesting how?" His voice had grown careful, guarded. Isabella leaned forward, her professional excitement overriding her natural diplomacy. "Marcus, you have one of the most naturally beautiful voices I've ever heard. The placement, the resonance, the musical intuition, it's extraordinary. Have you ever considered auditioning for—" "No." The word came out sharper than he'd intended. Marcus stepped back slightly, his entire demeanor shifting. "I'm sorry, Ms. Rodriguez, but you're mistaken. I'm a chef. I cook. That's what I do." The air between them crackled with tension. Isabella recognized the fear in his eyes. She'd seen it in her own mirror for months after her injury, the terror of exposing one's deepest vulnerabilities to the world's judgment. "Marcus," she said softly, "what if I told you that the Metropolitan Opera is holding auditions next month for their new season? What if—" "Then I'd tell you to enjoy your lunch," Marcus replied, his professional mask sliding back into place. "And I'd remind you that some people are perfectly happy with the lives they've chosen." He turned and walked back toward the kitchen, leaving Isabella staring at the halibut growing cold on her plate and the echo of the most beautiful, untrained voice she'd ever encountered. 3 days had passed since Isabella Rodriguez's unexpected visit, and Marcus Chen found himself unable to shake the memory of her words. The kitchen at Lumiere felt different now, smaller somehow, as if her presence had shifted the very dimensions of his sanctuary. He moved through his morning preparations with mechanical precision, but the melodies that usually flowed so naturally from his lips came in fragments, interrupted by thoughts he couldn't quite silence. "Che gelida manina," he began, then stopped abruptly, his hands frozen over the mise en place. The aria from La Bohème felt too exposed, too vulnerable. Instead, he focused on the rhythmic chopping of shallots, letting the blade's percussion replace the music that no longer felt safe. Maria noticed first, as she always did. The elderly prep cook had been watching Marcus since he was 7 years old, and she could read his moods like sheet music. She approached his station with the careful grace of someone who understood that even gentle souls could have sharp edges. "Mijo," she said softly, using the Spanish endearment that had comforted him through childhood's scraped knees and teenage heartbreaks. "You haven't sung all morning. The kitchen feel quiet." Marcus continued his chopping, each cut precise and angry. "I sing too much. It's unprofessional." "Ay, por favor." Maria's laugh held decades of wisdom. "Unprofessional. You think Abuela Carmen taught you to cook in silence? She sang lullabies to her soufflés and love songs to her sauces. Food made without music has no soul." The mention of his grandmother hit Marcus like a physical blow. Carmen Chen had been the bridge between his Chinese father's reserved perfectionism and his Mexican mother's passionate expressiveness. In her kitchen, cultures had blended as seamlessly as flavors, and music had been the common language that bound everything together. "It's different now," Marcus muttered, finally looking up from his cutting board. His eyes held a haunted quality that made Maria's heart ache. Someone heard me, someone who knows about these things. Ah, Maria's understanding was immediate and complete. She'd been there the day Marcus's parents died, had held him while he sobbed into her flour-dusted apron. She'd watched him retreat from the world of board meetings and investment portfolios, seeking refuge in the only place that still felt like home. The opera lady. Marcus nodded, unable to trust his voice. Isabella Rodriguez had shattered something fragile inside him, not maliciously but with the devastating efficiency of truth. For 4 years, he'd existed in careful equilibrium, using his inherited wealth to create this perfect bubble where he could be useful without being exposed, successful without being scrutinized. The kitchen door swung open, and James appeared with his usual morning report. "Chef, we've got a problem. The food critic from the Times wants to interview you about the restaurant's philosophy. She's specifically asking about the ambiance." Marcus felt ice forming in his stomach. "What did you tell her? That you don't do interviews? But she's persistent. Says she's heard interesting things about the total sensory experience at Lumiere." James paused, studying his boss's pale face. "Should I keep putting her off?" Before Marcus could answer, Sarah burst through the doors with uncharacteristic urgency. "Marcus, you need to see this." She held up her phone, her expression a mixture of excitement and concern. The Times food blogger posted about last Friday's dinner. Listen to this. "While the cuisine at Lumiere is undeniably exceptional, it's the ethereal quality of the evening that truly sets this establishment apart. The chef's unconscious musical accompaniment to his culinary artistry creates an atmosphere that transcends mere dining. It becomes performance art." The phone felt heavy in Marcus's hands as he read the post himself. 23 comments already, all praising the mysterious singing chef and the operatic ambiance of the restaurant. His private world was becoming public entertainment. "It gets worse," Sarah continued gently. "There's a video. Someone recorded you singing O Sol Mio during the dinner service last week." Marcus's knees nearly buckled. The video was grainy, shot from a customer's table, but his voice came through clearly. The comments below ranged from amazed to analytical. "Better than most professionals I've heard. Someone should get this guy an agent. Is he trained? That technique is incredible." "Turn it off," Marcus whispered, but the damage was done. His sanctuary had been breached. His private moments of musical expression transformed into entertainment for strangers. The very thing that had kept him sane for 4 years, the ability to exist in his kitchen without judgment or expectation, was being stripped away. "Mijo," Maria said softly, "maybe this isn't such a terrible thing." "Isn't terrible?" Marcus's voice cracked. "Maria, I'm not a performer. I'm not my parents, brilliant and confident and ready to conquer the world. I cook. That's all I know how to do." The words hung in the air like smoke from a burnt sauce. James and Sarah exchanged glances, both recognizing that they were witnessing something deeper than simple stage fright. "Chef," James said carefully, "with respect, that's bullshit." Marcus looked up, startled by his sous chef's rare profanity. "You think cooking isn't performing?" James continued, his voice gaining strength. "Every night, you create magic for 43 strangers. You read their faces, adjust your creations based on their energy, make them feel things they didn't expect to feel. You think that's not artistry? It's different," Marcus protested weakly. "How?" Sarah joined in, her managerial diplomacy abandoned in favor of frank honesty. "Because you're hiding in the kitchen instead of standing on a stage? Because you're feeding people instead of singing to them? Marcus, you've been performing for years. The only difference is the size of your audience." The truth in their words was undeniable, but it terrified him. Marcus thought of Isabella Rodriguez, of the hunger in her eyes when she'd spoken about the Metropolitan Opera auditions. He thought of his parents, who had faced their fears and built an empire from nothing. He thought of his grandmother, who had sung to everything she touched because she believed music made life better. What if I'm not good enough? The question escaped before he could stop it, raw and vulnerable in the pristine kitchen air. Maria moved closer, her weathered hands gentle on his shoulders. "Mijo, your grandmother used to say that fear is just excitement, wearing the wrong clothes. Maybe it's time to help it change." Outside, the lunch crowd was beginning to gather. Soon the kitchen would fill with the controlled chaos of service, and Marcus would once again lose himself in the rhythm of creation. But for now, in this moment of painful clarity, he allowed himself to imagine a different kind of stage, a different kind of audience. Somewhere in the city, Isabella Rodriguez was waiting for an answer to a question that could change everything. 2 weeks later, Marcus Chen stood outside the Metropolitan Opera House, his hands trembling despite the mild October afternoon. The iconic arched windows of Lincoln Center rose before him like a cathedral of dreams. each one reflecting the autumn sunlight with an intensity that made him squint. He'd driven past this building countless times, never imagining he'd one day walk through its doors as anything other than a patron. Isabella Rodriguez waited by the fountain, elegant in a tailored navy coat that spoke of European sophistication. When she spotted Marcus approaching, her face lit up with a mixture of relief and determination that reminded him why he'd finally said yes to this terrifying leap of faith. "You came," she said simply, extending her hand. "I wasn't entirely certain you would." Marcus shook her hand, noting the calluses on her fingertips, a singer's occupational hazard from years of piano practice. "I'm not entirely certain either. This feels like the most elaborate form of professional suicide ever attempted." Isabella's laugh was warm and knowing. Every great artist has felt that way before their first real audition. The terror means you understand what's at stake. They walked together toward the stage door, passing clusters of young singers warming up with scales and arpeggios. Marcus felt ancient and foolish among them, a 38-year-old chef pretending to be something he'd never trained to become. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent 4 years hiding from his inheritance, only to voluntarily step into an even more exposed arena. "Tell me again why this matters," Marcus said, pausing at the entrance. "Why risk your reputation on someone you've heard sing exactly once?" Isabella studied his face with the intensity of someone who'd spent her career reading audiences from distant stages. "Because 6 months ago, I thought my career was over. A vocal injury that the doctors said would heal, but the fear," she touched her throat unconsciously. "I'd lost my confidence, my joy in singing. Then I heard you in that kitchen, making music as naturally as breathing, and I remembered why I fell in love with this art form in the first place." The backstage area of the Met buzzed with controlled energy. Singers practiced in corners, accompanists shuffled sheet music, and administrative assistants hurried past with clipboards and worried expressions. Marcus felt like an imposter in his carefully chosen black suit, formal enough to show respect, simple enough not to draw attention. Marcus Chen, a young woman with a headset, appeared beside them. "I'm Jennifer, the audition coordinator. Ms. Rodriguez has explained your unique situation. Maestro Toretti is very curious to hear you." They followed Jennifer through a maze of corridors, lined with photographs of legendary performers: Pavarotti, Callas, Price, Domingo. Each image seemed to watch Marcus with expectation that felt both inspiring and crushing. The audition room was smaller than he'd imagined, an intimate space with a grand piano, a few chairs and acoustics that would reveal every imperfection. Maestro Toretti, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and penetrating eyes, sat behind a simple table with 3 other panel members. "Mr. Chen," the maestro said in accented English that suggested Italian origins. "Ms. Rodriguez tells me you're a chef who sings. An interesting combination. What will you perform for us today?" Marcus had practiced this moment in his apartment for 2 weeks, had chosen his piece with Isabella's guidance, but now his mind went completely blank. The silence stretched until Isabella stepped forward. "Maestro, if I may suggest, Mr. Chen's gift is in his natural interpretation. Perhaps we could start with something simple, something that allows his instincts to guide him." The accompanist, a patient-looking woman in her 40s, played a few opening chords. "Nessun dorma," she suggested quietly, a familiar piece. Marcus closed his eyes, trying to find the peace he'd always felt in his kitchen. He thought of steam rising from perfect pasta, of the satisfaction of a sauce reduced to exactly the right consistency, of his grandmother's voice guiding him through his first attempts at complex dishes. When he opened his eyes and began to sing, it was with the same intention he brought to every plate he crafted, to create something beautiful and nourishing for others. "Nessun dorma, tu pure, o principessa nella tua fredda stanza." The first notes emerged tentatively, but as the familiar melody took hold, Marcus felt something shift inside him. This wasn't so different from service at the restaurant. The same focus, the same desire to transport his audience to somewhere better than where they'd started. His voice gained strength and confidence, filling the small room with warmth that seemed to surprise even him. The panel members' expressions changed from polite skepticism to genuine attention. Maestro Toretti leaned forward, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. The accompanist smiled as she played, caught up in the unexpected beauty of the moment. "Ma il mio mistero è chiuso in me, il nome mio nessun saprà. No, sulla tua bocca lo dirò quando la luce splenderà." As Marcus reached the aria's climactic moments, he thought of everything that had brought him to this point: his parents' death, his retreat into the kitchen, the years of using music as private therapy, Isabella's unexpected intrusion into his carefully controlled world. All of it converged in his voice, transforming technique into truth. Ed il mio bacio scioglierà il silenzio che ti fa mia. Dilegua o notte, tramontate stelle. All'alba vincerò, vincerò, vincerò. The final notes hung in the air like incense, powerful and reverent. The silence that followed felt sacred rather than empty. Marcus opened his eyes to find the entire panel staring at him, with expressions ranging from astonishment to something approaching awe. Maestro Toretti was the first to speak, his voice soft with wonder. Mr. Chen, in 30 years of auditions, I have rarely heard such natural musicality combined with emotional honesty. You sing like someone who has lived every word. Marcus felt tears threatening, not from fear this time, but from a recognition he'd never expected to feel. This was home, just as much as his kitchen had ever been. Different tools, different ingredients, but the same fundamental desire to feed souls rather than just bodies. We'd like to offer you a place in our Emerging Artists program, the maestro continued. It's intensive. 6 months of coaching, technique refinement, and performance opportunities. Are you prepared for that level of commitment? Marcus looked at Isabella, whose eyes shone with pride and vindication. He thought of his restaurant, of Maria and James and Sarah, of the life he'd built from grief and caution. Then he thought of his grandmother's voice singing lullabies to her soufflés, and he knew his answer. Si, maestro, vincerò. Outside, autumn was giving way to winter, but inside the Metropolitan Opera House, a new voice was just beginning to find its true home.